بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم والصلاة والسلام على نبينا محمد وعلى آله وأصحابه أجمعين أما بعد. Today inshallah we continue the station of al-Ithar, selflessness, and we begin with the second level. قال أبو إسماعيل رحمه الله تعالى الدرجة الثانية إيثار رضا الله على رضا غيره وإن عظمت فيه المحن وثقلت فيه المؤن وضعف عنه الطول والبدن. This level, Abu Ismail rahimahullah ta'ala says that Ithar here becomes more about centralizing Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. If the first level is about really good manners towards humanity, to the extent that the believer will give precedence or give preference to someone else over their own needs, the second level is about always giving preference to the pleasure of Allah over the pleasure of anything else. So Abu Ismail rahimahullah ta'ala says that the second level is doing ithar for the pleasure of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala over the pleasure of anyone or anything else. So just a very simple example, I have a choice to make. I am in a social gathering and wine is presented to me, offered to me. If I take it, I will please those in the setting. They will see me as more part of their setting. I might be able to have better business partners as a result. Right? They won't look at me as being strange or for an outsider, so to speak. There's that choice. Or I can choose to refrain from that. Why? Because, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is displeased with such a behavior. So what am I going to choose? Now, Ithar at the second level is about preferring the pleasure of Allah over the pleasure of these people. That is the second level. And this isn't easy, as you all know. Us as Muslims living in a majority non-Muslim land, a vast majority non-Muslim land, with certain social practices, social customs that are very different than Muslim societies. And so we always are looked at as being strange, as being weird. Why do they do this? Why do they do that? So it's not easy. And therefore, only a naive person will ever think that they are always doing ithar for the pleasure of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and they'll never stop at any expense. Right? And the reason this is so difficult is, as Abu Ismail rahimahullah ta'ala continues to say, that the person will always give preference to the pleasure of Allah over the pleasure of the creation. وَإِنْ عَظُمَتْ فِيهِ الْمِحَنِ, even if the hardships become very difficult. Even when the hardships become extremely difficult. And Ibn Qayyim rahmatullah alayhi makes a very, very important point. He said, along with this being a behavior of the prophets. You see, the prophets engage in this. The prophets are the ones who went against the customs of their land, of their people, who challenged the traditions of their people, the religion, the theologies of their people. And what came about as a result? Their people fought against the Prophet. Their people attacked the Prophet, tarnished the Prophet's reputation. That hurts, especially when the Prophet is coming at from a very soft angle. He's not going there and saying, you guys are all hellfire and this and that. Yeah, there are some warnings in that regard, but prophets always came with the best of character, with the best of intention, that they seek to help their society, not to, destroy them, not to harm them. They're trying to help them. So it hurts when the person you're trying to help responds in a very vicious way. So this is the level of the prophets. And essentially what happens is that since this behavior is such a high level when it comes to Iman, and those who live by this right, have high levels in the afterlife, such as the prophets and the companions. What essentially happens is Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tests such people, those who are trying to win the pleasure of Allah at the expense, even at the expense of the pleasure and the opinion of people. These people, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tests them. Why? Because this high level is only for people who are sincere in it. And therefore Allah tests these individuals to see or to show those people who is really sincere about that and who isn't. Who really deserves that level and who isn't. Right? So you find that those who have such a public position and this responsibility, such as in our times, they're tested with the opinion of people. A scholar who's at the higher levels of society. I'm talking about maybe they are the mufti of the region or of the country, or they are the chief justice of the country. Sometimes they have to make decisions that affect the entire country. Right? And they know how people are going to react if they choose A over B, for example. What happens when people want A, but Allah and His Messenger say B? That's not an easy position to be in. And as soon as they say B, all the people are going to start attacking this person as being a hypocrite, as being a sellout, as being this and that. We always hear this rhetoric, always. So that's a test. So we only reach this level of Ithar, or we reach this level of Ithar not simply by one time preferring the pleasure of Allah over the pleasure of someone else. Or maybe every now and then we choose the pleasure of Allah over the pleasure of people. We really reach this level once we pass these tests that go with this level, that go with this behavior of Iman. Right? So وَإِنْ عَظُمَتْ فِيهِ الْمِحَنِ, even if they do this, even if the tests and the hardships become severe. وَثَقُلَتْ فِيهِ الْمُؤَنِ, and the mu'na is really that which sustains you. And so what's being said here, or what I understand as being said here, is that even if it becomes difficult to provide for yourself, because back in the day when societies were smaller and everyone knew everyone else, if someone is at this level of Ithar, they're really going to lose public opinion, so to speak, or for the meantime. And as a result, people will be less inclined to do business with this person, to trade with this person, among other things. So even if providing the self becomes heavy or difficult, that they continue to prefer Allah over people, and to pursue Allah's pleasure over the pleasure of people. وَضَعُفَ عَنْهُ الطَّوْلُ وَالْبَدَنِ, and their strength and their bodies weaken, even if their strength and their body begins to weaken as a result. Because when you're under so much pressure, what happens? You begin to weaken. Your self-esteem goes down, your morale goes down. That is simple, natural human behavior, human psychology. It's very normal. The Prophet ﷺ used to get sad. He used to be sad over the behaviors of his people. Why aren't they accepting? And sometimes, the Quran alludes to this. Maybe the Prophet ﷺ thought that, he's not doing the best job that he could. That there is something wrong with his strategies in da'wah. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala comes and reassures the Prophet ﷺ, you're not doing anything wrong. You're doing it 100% right. The problem isn't you, the problem is the people. So don't fall into that mentality. So how about us? And we see everyone is criticizing us, everyone is attacking us. And all we are trying to do is call people to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in the politest of manners. Because there are some people who are just, they like to stir up controversy. They're always aggressive in their speech. They attack people. And so it's very natural that they're going to be attacked back. That's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about people who are of the politest demeanor, of the best character, of the most sincere hearts, trying to help people get to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Okay? It hurts. It really does. But what we can take is the following. What's important is to understand the following. That whoever prefers the pleasure of Allah, then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will protect that person from the anger of the creation. But whoever prefers the pleasure of people, then know that those people cannot protect him or her from the anger of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Allah, in other words, Allah can protect us from them. They can't protect us from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And so we are always in the correct circle when we seek Allah's pleasure. And we will always be in the wrong circle if and when we prefer the pleasure of people. So, and then Abu Ismail rahimahullah ta'ala says how we can sustain such a level of iman. And he says, وَيُسْتَطَاعُ هَذَا بِثَلَاثَةِ أَشْيَاء. We are able to accomplish this with three things. بِطِيبِ الْعَوْدِ وَحُسْنِ الْإِسْلَامِ وَقُوَّةِ الصَّبْرِ. We can accomplish it by really holding on to the beauty of the return, meaning the return to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Now we know and we have come to be accustomed to how important belief in the afterlife is when it comes to our iman. And that there is a strong correlation between our belief in the afterlife and our belief in Allah. Our belief in the afterlife and our application of the religion. Our belief in the afterlife and the understanding, a pure, correct understanding of Islam. It's very strong, and here we have it come up again. In order to sustain this level of iman that is constantly and persistingly preferring Allah over the creation, over the self, even in light of hardships and negative counter reactions, in order to sustain such a level of iman, we need to be attracted and grasp the beauty of the return to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And to recognize that what we are enduring and the choices that we are making, in other words, the choice of preferring Allah over the creation, what this is leading to. And what it's leading to isn't an immediate reward, but rather a long-term investment that we will fully enjoy in the afterlife. And in this life, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will give us kind of appetizers or breezes of what's to come in the afterlife. In a sense that anyone who's able to sustain this type of iman, this level of iman, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will begin to elevate their status in this life as kind of a prelude to the afterlife. So what you find is that those who live by this principle of iman, you'll find by the time they die, Allah will have elevated their name and elevated their status among humanity. And will have documented will document and preserve their history, their biography, for people to learn from and for people to praise and make dua for this person. But that is in the long term. It's not in the short term. And so whoever wants to please Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, they need to see it as a long-term investment. Yes, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will send us gifts and rewards every now and then, but the fruits of this endeavor is in the long run. And it's important to be mentally prepared for that. And in order to really benefit and to flourish by this principle of this return to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, then we also need to practice two things. Number one is az-zuhud fil hayati wa thana. We went over the station of zuhud, asceticism. And here Ibn Qayyim rahmatullah alayh is saying that in order to really live by this principle of returning to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and be mentally prepared for this long-term investment, or be committed to this long-term investment. In the meantime, we need to be ascetic towards life and towards praise. Life and praise. In other words, in order for me to really benefit from a long-term investment, I need to practice, right, asceticism right now. And to give you an analogy here, when you look at wealthy individuals, whether they're older in age or they're starting to become wealthy at a younger age, you will find that they are very frugal, in a sense that they are very, very conscious of what they spend their money on. And they are always trying to save as much money as possible. I'm talking about in their 20s. So as soon as they graduate college and they begin their professional life, their salary might be $60,000, let's say. But what they are doing, and they're single, of course, because if you're married, you really can't do this. That's unfair to the family. But if they're single, what they start doing is they save every single penny. They will live with other people to save on rent. They will drive a very beat-up car, so they don't pay money to either to lease or to buy an expensive car. And they're saving every single dollar. And what they do is they take that money and they save it and they put it in investments. Right? They keep doing that and they keep doing that and they keep doing that until they have enough to open a business or to do a bigger investment, etc. They keep saving and saving and saving and saving. Why? For the long term. So that by the time they hit 45, they hit 50, they're already a multimillionaire. Right? They've already paid off everything. They're not in any debt. And now they start using their millions to invest in more, and they become multimillionaires with tens of millions of dollars, if not more. So this is the long-term, right? The long-term investment mindset. They are being ascetic in life, as well as ascetic in praise. Because look, if you're driving around in such a car, people are going to look at you differently, and that's just the reality. Right? If you are trying to save every single penny, you're not exactly going to invite people for a party that costs money that they don't want to spend now. They'll do it later on in life once they have millions, but now that's not the time. This is the way they think. So similarly, the believer who is investing in the afterlife, they need to be ascetic in how they behave in this life. When you have these choices, the way we think is, what is going to bring me the long-term profit, or what's going to bring me the greatest return in the long term, meaning in the afterlife, right? Going and chilling, or going to the masjid, for example. What's better for me? This is the mentality here, right? Your friends call you, hey, let's go play basketball and whatnot, and you say, no, I need to go to the masjid to pray, and there's a session afterwards. I'm getting closer to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. With time, those friends are going to say, you know what, forget this guy. We're not even going to talk to him anymore. Right? So you need that asceticism in this life in order to get that long-term investment. And then Ibn Qayyim rahmatullah alayhi says, فَمَا ضَعُفَ مَنْ ضَعُفَ وَتَأَخَّرَ مَنْ تَأَخَّرَ إِلَّا بِحُبِّهِ لِلْحَيَاةِ وَالْبَقَاءِ. He says that the reason he says that a person doesn't weaken or doesn't fall behind, meaning in their iman or in their rank in the afterlife, except because of their love for this life and the yearning to live longer. So kind of, reassessing or reminding us of what we've gone over before. Love of this life is antithetical to Islam. But notice my wording here. Love of this life is not antithetical, let me say detrimental to Iman. Not living life, in the sense that I am doing what people do in life. Loving life, being attached to this life, this is detrimental to Iman. And you can have two people doing the same exact activity. For one person, it's just a mundane activity. For the other person, it's attachment to this life. Right? So two people can enjoy a nice plate of food. They're foodies, as they call them. Right? But for one person, it's just they see it as a blessing of Allah that I can say Alhamdulillah for. For the other person, it's they are showing off that I did this and I did that, and they're posting it on Facebook. Look at where I ate today, and you all know the social media stuff. These two people are doing the same exact thing, but there's a huge difference in terms of how it's rooted in the heart. For one, it's a blessing of Allah that brings them closer to Allah. For the other, it's attachment to this life that takes them away from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and they're sitting next to each other. So Ibn Qayyim reminds us, and this is really important, especially with the lifestyles of today. People today, all of life in the West is structured in a way where it's about attachment to this life. It's about investing only in this life, enjoying only this life, living life as if there's nothing after it. And that makes Iman very difficult. And finally, الدرجة الثالثة, the third level, إثار Allah. إثار الله. أو إثار الله. فإن الخوض في الإيثار دعوة في الملك. ثم ترك شهود رؤيتك إيثار الله ثم غيبتك عن الترك. So here you get into kind of these complex spiritual matters that really are often unnecessary, but nonetheless, I'll try to go through it. The third level is doing ithar to your ithar of Allah. Right? Again, the complexity, the strange wording and whatnot. Essentially, what is being said here is that when we engage in preferring Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, that in order to really become an expert in this level, to really fully be immersed in this level, then we need to let go of our perception that we are preferring Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. How to word this is really strange. In other words, when we do ithar, right, if we recognize that what we are doing is the preference of Allah, meaning I am engaging in ithar of Allah, right, that's good, but in order to truly reach the higher level, we need to be so disconnected from, we need to lose all pride of our behaviors in Iman to where we no longer see what we are doing as being even worthwhile. I don't even know if I explain if that makes sense, but I'll try and reword it. It's about recognizing and acknowledging that when you practice ithar, that this practice isn't rooted in your own good iman or strong iman, but rather that this is a blessing of Allah coming to you, and that any time you prefer Allah over the creation, then that is Allah's tawfiq. The explanation, how do we explain that behavior, is that Allah gave you the tawfiq to do that. And not that my iman has reached a level where it is motivating me to do that. So our iman or our behaviors aren't the result of innate iman or iman that is within us, but rather it is tawfiq from Allah that is allowing me to do this. And as a result, we see that it is really this ithar is purely Allah's blessing upon us, and therefore there is no reason to see myself as worthy of praise, or to even say I did this. Rather, Allah gave me the tawfiq to do this. Allah blessed me with an opportunity to do a good deed. Allah gave me the inspiration to do this good deed. Right? And although, again, this is complex, it's not easy to fully grasp. But when you really think about this, it is so beautiful. Why? Because it really reinforces a fundamental part of Iman, right? In that the relationship is direct between you and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And therefore, the more you're able to remove any of these kind of tunnels towards Allah, to where it becomes a direct relationship between you and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, the more we establish a platform for loving Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Because if I see my positive behaviors, my behaviors of Iman, as being nothing more than Allah blessing me with this, right, I will begin to perceive these behaviors as a gift from Allah instead of my own hard work. It just further centralizes Allah. So what we find in Abu Ismail's third levels of these various stations, it's further reinforcing the centralization of Allah. How? By removing even ourself from the image. It's not about me doing something, but rather Allah giving me the tawfiq to do it. Right? And therefore, what happens here furthermore is that when we make this claim that it is Allah who's giving me the tawfiq, we further instill within us the concept of Allah's sovereignty. Right? How so? Well, if Ithar is about helping someone else, doing something good that reaches other people, right, and I see this as coming exclusively from Allah, then essentially the way we will begin to view the world is that, let's say for example, you preferred someone with an amount of money. You have a few $100s in your account or wherever, and you know someone who is in need. Now, it's not that you don't need this money. I mean, you can really use that money. You have plans for that money, but you see that this person is in need, and you have the opportunity to help that person. So you do ithar of this money so that that other person can benefit from it. Right? In the first and second levels, we have accomplished the first and second levels in that I did ihsan to someone else. I behaved excellently with someone else. I benefited them. And also I did this seeking Allah's pleasure. So we fulfill those two. But what the third one is telling us, right, is that it is Allah who essentially inspired me to do this. And therefore, Allah's sovereignty has decreed that this money was never mine to begin with. Rather, it is part of Allah's property that He transmitted to this person to use. Does that make sense? So we no longer see my giving of money to this person as me giving charity to this person, but rather Allah is providing that person, not me. That is their rizq coming from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, not from me. And the Arabs have this, there's a saying that they have that this item that was in my hand, right, was never my rizq, it was never my provisions, it was for someone else. So for example, let's say you are walking and you have a sandwich, and the sandwich falls from your hand and comes on the floor. And all these birds come and they start eating from the sandwich, right? The saying is going to go that, well, I guess this sandwich was never my rizq in the first place. It was their rizq. It was theirs. Right? This is the idea here. That although I'm the one who purchased the sandwich and it was in my hand and the intention was to eat it, Allah had another plan for all of this. That Allah wanted to provide the birds and He did it through me. Now Allah could have provided the birds in a different way. So why am I involved in the process of something like as simple as feeding birds? Well, so that I can have the reward. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, in His generosity and His mercy, He governs and He manages the creation in a way where He maximizes the reward of His believers. Yeah, I mean, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala could have brought rizq, provision to these birds in any way. I mean, He could have just, in the forests where no human lives, right? But in order for Allah to give me reward, He inspired me to go to get that sandwich and caused me to fumble, and drop the sandwich and brought all of these birds, so that every ounce of food that these birds are eating, right, from what I purchased with my money is now charity, sadaqah, in my ledger, in my book of deeds. Because the Prophet ﷺ says that any animal that eats from your garden, that is sadaqah for you. You're getting sadaqah, a reward of charity for that. And that anytime an animal benefits from water that you have, or you give water to an animal, then there's sadaqah in that. That's an act of charity. That's the idea here, the general idea here, that we begin to see and acknowledge that Allah is in control of everything. And therefore, any good that I do is not rooted in myself, but rather coming externally from Allah as tawfiq for me, helping me reach higher levels of paradise. So that's the general idea here. And so the more we are able to exclude the self from this process, from this image, right, and further centralize Allah's role in all of the good that comes from Ithar and these other stations, the more we kind of have this direct relationship with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And it's just more and more beautiful, subhanahu wa ta'ala. And with that, let me see here. And with that, we conclude the station of al-Ithar, and the station of al-Khuluq, manners, good manners, comes next. Abu Ismail rahimahullah ta'ala says, وَمِن manazil iyyaka na'budu wa iyyaka nasta'een manzilat al-Khuluq. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, وَإِنَّكَ لَعَلَى خُلُقٍ عَظِيمٍ. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tells the Prophet alayhi salatu wasalam in Surah Al-Qalam, and indeed you are on great manners, extremely good manners. And the preposition that the Quran uses to describe this is the preposition ala, which means above or on top of. And it's as if Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is saying that not only do you have good manners, you're actually above that. Right? That your manners are so beautiful, so great, that you are on top of a description of good manners. So think of any way you can describe, any adjective that you can use to describe good manners, extremely good manners, perfect manners, etc. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is as if He is telling us that the Prophet ﷺ's manners was above that. Describe in any way, he's above it. Alayhi salatu wassalam. And some have commented and said that khuluq azim, what's meant by khuluq actually is religion. You are on a great religion. And so Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is using the word khuluq synonymously with religion to show us the huge or the very strong relationship between religiosity and manners. That religion has come to perfect manners. And that someone will not attain piety until they have good manners. And our Sharia mentions this a few times. So the Prophet ﷺ says, إِنَّمَا جِئْتُ لِأُتَمِّمَ مَكَارِمَ الْأَخْلَاقِ. And the way it's worded is that I have only come to perfect gracious manners. Right? Now, of course, the Prophet ﷺ came with theology. He came with tawheed. And that's the message of Islam. And someone who is a believer but has bad manners will still be a person of paradise. And someone who has extremely good manners but disbelieves will not make it to paradise. So why is the Prophet ﷺ using such exclusive language? Right? It's just to emphasize the weight and the role of manners when it comes to piety. Sure, a person can believe without having good manners, but they're never going to reach good and strong and healthy iman until they have good manners. And the early generations of Islam, these scholars, they would make statements like, I studied Islam for 20 years, and I studied manners for 40 years. Right? Knowledge is one level, but the application of that knowledge, that's where we want to reach. If we're just learning and not applying that, that's not really beneficial. But rather, we need to learn how to apply the Sharia, and therefore they really focused on manners. 40 years, can you imagine 40 years learning manners? Let me ask you all a question. Have you ever read a book on manners? Have you ever even heard of a book on manners? Have you ever seen your children holding a book on manners? Have you ever heard of a class that your child took that's about manners and ethics? No. Yet, the pious Muslims, our pious predecessors, studied manners for 40 years. And by the way, it's not just studying it and that's it. You know how to talk about it. They practiced it. And therefore, it was inconceivable and unacceptable for someone to be a teacher without having good manners. And it was unacceptable for someone to teach something, but they don't practice it. But here in the West, you can have a professor of moral theology, and they are the most immoral person on earth. And no one will ever comment on that. There is this disconnect here in the West between knowledge and action, a huge disconnect. In the Muslim world and just in general in the eastern part of the world, there is a focus on manners, a huge focus on manners. And it's unacceptable for a teacher, a scholar, to be someone who isn't full of manners, or to teach something that they themselves don't practice. So, this is, the Islam reinforces this concept between piety and manners. And the Prophet ﷺ tells us and advises us when it comes to marriage, مَنْ أَتَاكُمْ تَرْضَوْنَ دِينَهُ وَخُلُقَهُ فَزَوِّجُوا. If someone comes and approaches your daughter for marriage, and they have piety, and they have good manners, then marry them off. And another narration, he puts manners before piety. Right? Don't ask questions like, who is your grandfather? What tribe are you from? What's your ethnicity? The Prophet ﷺ says that's all irrelevant, because they can be of the most noble tribe. If they don't have good manners, your daughter is going to have a miserable life. If they don't have piety, the man's going to lead her down the bad path. And if the person is of the lowest levels of society, the lowest classes of society, but they have good manners, good piety, your daughter will be in a paradise on earth. Right? So you have this strong attachment. Piety and manners. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gives us a comprehensive verse, or a verse that is comprehensive to gracious manners. And that is, خُذِ الْعَفْوَ وَأْمُرْ بِالْعُرْفِ وَأَعْرِضْ عَنِ الْجَاهِلِينَ. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says in the end of Surah Al-A'raf, take whatever little people offer, خُذِ الْعَفْوَ وَأْمُرْ بِالْعُرْفِ, and command that which is good, وَأَعْرِضْ عَنِ الْجَاهِلِينَ, and turn away from the ignorant. These are three characteristics that if you can apply them, and you can learn how to apply them, when to apply them, these are kind of the roots of all good manners, of all gracious manners. When you deal with people, take little, as one opinion explains this to mean. If you deal with people, don't expect a lot from them. Expect a little from them. This is very important. And imagine this in your own social circles. When someone comes to visit you, right, it is pretty traditional, pretty standard that you bring a gift to the family. Right? It is traditional that we have in a way we speak to one another. There are certain guidelines, there are certain rules, there are red lines. When you deal with people, don't have high expectations of people. Have lower expectations, not low, lower expectations. If they come with a small gift, an invaluable gift, then accept it from them. And don't confront them, say, oh, look at this person did this and this person. Don't expect it. Let your expectation, have healthy expectations of people. And when you do that, right, you avoid a lot of the unnecessary kind of feuds and back and forths between people. Right? How many times do we know that, oh, you see so-and-so, look at the gift that they brought us. Look at this, oh, how did they do it? And backbiting occurs and hard feelings are developed, resentment comes about. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is telling us, expect little from people. Okay? And the wa'mur bil-'urf, command that which is good. And if we are commanding that which is good, then it should be expected that we also behave in such a manner. Because we all don't accept someone who is telling us to do this, this, and that, and they're doing the direct opposite. So if we are going to command and encourage the good, then it assumes that and implies that we should be practicing it before we even command it. So you be good with people. And let your good towards people not be with a mentality of reciprocity. You see, this is something that I notice a lot in social gatherings. That the way they treat me, I'm going to treat them. You know, if they give me a small gift, I'm going to return that with a small gift. If they speak ill of me, I'm going to speak ill of them. Right? That's not the best of manners. Right? Now, by the way, giving gifts and whatnot, it's not an obligation, so to speak. So, you know, if you give them a small gift, you're not doing anything haram. We're talking now about more higher levels of manners. Right? Be good with people and don't have too high expectations from people. And turn away from those who are ignorant. People start talking nonsense. People start saying this and that. People start doing bad things. Turn away from them. Turn away from them. Don't get caught up with the heat of the moment and in the heat of the moment. Rather, wait for things to cool down and then have a conversation. Because when you are in the heat of the moment, we don't think right. It becomes more about, I'm going to tear the other person apart in order for me to be the stronger one. So you find that these three characteristics are the root of gracious behaviors, gracious manners. And then we have a narration which, when this verse came down, the Prophet ﷺ asked Jibreel, to kind of explain this a little bit more. And Jibreel ﷺ tells the Prophet ﷺ that Allah is telling you to continue to connect with your family members who have cut you off, and to give those who have restricted you, and to forgive those who have done injustice to you. That's not easy. That's not easy. But remember, the Prophet ﷺ is above the best and the most gracious of characteristics, ﷺ. But this is something we should aspire towards. Okay. So another way to kind of dissect or to analyze the verse is in the following way. Ibn Qayyim rahmatullah alayhi says that when we deal with people, we really have three scenarios. One is we command them and discourage them in things that is in their best interest. Someone says, I'm thinking about doing this. And in our experience, we know that that's not good. So we discourage them from going down that path. Someone says, I'm thinking about doing this, and it's good for them. Our role is to encourage them to do it. So the first scenario is that we are considering what is in the best interest of this person, and we're trying to get them there. The second is when we are receiving from them. When we receive from them, When we receive from them, we take whatever they offer. We don't have these expectations. It's not that I want this, don't give me that, or you better give me this or that, or I'm going to do that. And the third scenario is you have, when it comes to your relationships with people, you have people who are your friends, and you have people who you're not on the same page with. And therefore, the way we deal with both is that we ensure at least we preserve and we fulfill what is obligatory upon us. So it makes sense, how to preserve and why we should fulfill what's obligatory upon us towards those who are our friends. But when it comes to those who we are not on the same page with, well, this verse is telling us, we need to still fulfill and honor our obligations. If there's something obligatory I need to do for this person, then I need to do it. Why? Because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is telling us that. Okay. And you have other scholars who give other kind of analysis of this verse. So, for example, Ibn Abbas, rahimahullah ta'ala, says, "Khudh al-'afw." What it means is that if you have extra money, on top of your family expenses and what's necessary for your family and for your life, then then give it in charity. وَأْمُرْ بِالْعُرْفِ, command tawheed. This is how Ibn Abbas rahimahullah ta'ala, radiyallahu ta'ala an, defined it. وَأْمُرْ بِالْعُرْفِ, command tawheed, encourage people to be committed to tawheed, to live by tawheed, to worship Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and then to turn away from those who reject tawheed, and not to be overly aggressive with them, and to be patient with them. In a hadith, the Prophet ﷺ tells us that إِنَّ الْبِرَّ هُوَ حُسْنُ الْخُلُقِ, that bir, piety, is excellent characteristics, excellent manners. So again, you have another example of how our Sharia correlates piety with manners. You're not going to have good piety until you have good manners. And then the Prophet ﷺ tells us, خَيَارُكُمْ أَحْسَانُكُمْ أَخْلَاقًا, the best of you are the best of you in manners. And the Prophet ﷺ says, مَا مِنْ شَيْءٍ أَثْقَلُ فِي مِيزَانِ الْمُؤْمِنِ يَوْمَ الْقِيَامَةِ مِنْ حُسْنِ الْخُلُقِ وَإِنَّ اللَّهَ تَعَالَى لَيُبْغِضُ الْفَاحِشَ الْبَذِيءِ. The Prophet ﷺ tells us that there is nothing heavier in the scales of the believer on the Day of Judgment than good manners. And indeed, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala despises the immoral and the vulgar individual. And the Prophet ﷺ was asked, who are the people who will most enter paradise? What are the characteristics that will get people to paradise? Let me put it that way. He said, taqwa Allah wa husnul khuluq, the piety of Allah, taqwa Allah, and excellent manners. And the Prophet ﷺ teaches us, inna min akmalil mu'minin imanan ahsanuhum akhlaqan wa khiyarukum khiyarukum linisa'ihim. The Prophet ﷺ teaches us that the most perfect of believers in their iman, right? Those who have perfected their iman are those who have the best and most excellent of manners. And he says, the best of you are the best to their wives. The very well-known hadith. And the Prophet ﷺ teaches us that إِنَّ الْمُؤْمِنَ لَا يُدْرِكَ بِحُسْنِ الْخُلُقِ دَرَجَةِ الصَّائِمِ الْقَائِمِ, that the believer will reach with their excellent characteristics, their excellent manners, the levels of the one who constantly fasts and constantly prays at night. So, this is huge, and this isn't something secondary in Islam. This is huge. For all of these ahadith to show us the significance and the weight of good manners in Islam, that's something we really need to take seriously. the Prophet ﷺ says, أنا زعيم ببيت في ربض الجنة لمن ترك المراء وإن كان محقا وببيت في وسط الجنة لمن ترك الكذب وإن كان مزاحا أو مزاحا وببيت في أعلى الجنة لمن حسن خلقه. Another extremely beautiful hadith. The Prophet ﷺ says, I will guarantee a person a house in the outskirts of paradise for the one who leaves arguing even if they are right. How many times do we argue and we bicker? All the time. And if someone tells us something, it's automatic. We need to show our status, our place. We cannot back down. We need to respond, or else people will say this and this about us. What does the Prophet ﷺ say? To leave arguing even if they are right. And that takes a lot of maturity. And that's a mature person. The Prophet ﷺ promises that person a home in the outskirts of paradise. And he promises a home in the middle of paradise for the one who leaves lying even if it's joking. Meaning sometimes when we joke, we say lies to get people to laugh, etc. Someone leaves that, then the Prophet ﷺ guarantees a place, a home in the middle of paradise. And he guarantees a home in the highest levels of paradise for the one who has excellent characteristics, excellent manners. And there are other hadith in this regard, but we need to stop here, inshallah. وصلى الله على نبينا محمد وعلى آله وأصحابه أجمعين والسلام عليكم ورحمة الله.